Well, hello everyone and welcome to Talks at Google. My name is Sachit Egan, and today I have the pleasure of introducing Tom Vanderbilt, reintroducing Tom. He was here at Google Mountain View 8 years ago. Tom is an author and journalist, and he's a contributing editor of Wired UK, Outside, and Artforum. His work encompasses a broad range of subjects such as design, technology, science, and culture, and his work has been featured in publications such as Slate, Wired, The Financial Times, Rolling Stone, New York Times Magazine, and Popular Science. Tom is the author of Survival City, Adventures Among the Ruins of Atomic America, and the bestseller Traffic, Why We Drive the Way We Do and What It Says About Ourselves, and he was here at Google a few years ago to chat about that. His latest book is You May Also Like, Taste in an Age of Endless Choice, and we're going to chat about that today. So welcome, Tom.
Great to be here.
Thanks for being here. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm just curious, was anyone remember seeing me for Traffic here, or hands? No. Okay.
High turnover.
So it is like Logan's Run. Everyone gets kicked out.
Pretty much. You got it.
Just checking.
Yeah. Very good. Well, let's begin with the obvious. So Traffic to now this subject about tastes, about what we like, why we like these things. Where did you come across this topic? Why did you choose to pursue it?
I've tried to come up with an elegant narrative that links Traffic and this book. I haven't really found one. I mean, one thing that interests me about some of these algorithmic recommendation systems, for example, is that I found that they were often pointing me to things that I may not have discovered for myself, for all their flaws. And just for a rough traffic analogy, I would say, if you talk to transportation planners, a lot of people do not optimize their daily commute. They do not, even though they've been doing it 10 years in a row, they have not found the most efficient way to do that. Hence, Waze and other services could sort of use math and things to point people into new information that they did not have before. So that's sort of some rough analogy. There's different ways to think about traffic as a system and some of the big data aspect of taste. But simpler story is one day I was walking to school, my daughter asked me what my favorite color was. And I said blue, and I gave this answer so quickly and so without thought that it almost disturbed me, or I thought, well, is it actually blue? Do I have a favorite color? What does it mean to have a favorite color? If it really is blue, where did that preference come from? And that question, where do preferences come from, is sort of what animated me throughout this whole thing. But there's a lot of complicated stories, but I try to tell that one as the immediate way, and that sort of animating logic behind everything.
Okay, great. So is the intent of the book then to broadly kind of dive into why we like things that we do, where these likes come from? What was the intent, I guess, when you set out to craft it into a book?
Yeah, the intent was, going back to college, I had read some of the sociology on this stuff, Pierre Bourdieu. He had a whole other take, but what Pierre Bourdieu didn't have, he did interviews with people in France. He had about 1,200 survey responses, questions like, who's your favorite composer? How do you cut your hair? Things like this. But since then, we're obviously now dealing with a lot bigger data sets here, and that part really interests me. Being immersed in this world where you not only had access to many more things that I ever thought possible. As sort of a teenager, I would have died to have Spotify. You can't even be imagined how narrow that bandwidth of my acquiring music was. Sure. And then, so once that huge door was open, and then you're faced with this terrifying chasm of like, oh, what do I do with all this stuff now that it's there? Another thing that started to dawn on me was how much I was being exposed to what other people thought of things, other people's opinion. Yelp, TripAdvisor, Amazon, all these sites. So, and if you started to read between the lines of these long, sorts of strings of reviews, there were some pretty interesting dynamics I thought going on there as well. So it all kind of just fused together, and just long-standing, as a former, sort of college radio DJ, just remembering these endless debates about music and what was good and what was bad. So it's all
in there.
It's a big stew. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's try to dive into that a little bit. You have a quote in there that all tastes, in essence, are acquired tastes instead of, I guess, implicit taste. And we should really be calling them acquired liking or acquired likes. Why is that?
Yeah, that's what a researcher at Monell, the Nutrition Institute, said to me. And it's the funny thing about taste is you can never quite nail it down. It's not fully a learned thing. It's not fully inherent or biological. It's not fully subjective. It's not fully objective. But I felt like people use that phrase "acquired taste" to describe these sort of rarefied or somewhat hard to like things like whiskey or something. But really, that process is pretty much the same for most things we go through in life. There are very few things that you just instantly like the very first time with no foregrounding, and those would be sort of the simplest taste, sugar.
Right.
But everything else is this acquired taste, and even that phrase is sort of funny because it hints. So you come to like whiskey, you come to like coffee. These things were immensely unpleasant the first time. You're acquiring this taste, but you're not going back to this original taste you had of that. The signal coming in from your tongue is the same, but somewhere your brain has sort of reshaped this whole consumption experience into something else. And whiskey or coffee hasn't changed, you've changed. And I mean, that's what sort of fascinates me. And you see that with art and with all sorts of other things. And it just, again, spoke to this sort of, the picture was less fixed than I had sort of imagined. But yeah, so I really do think all tastes are to some extent acquired. Liking is learning.
Sure.
It's sort of a cliche, but it applies more broadly than I think we sometimes give it credit.
I see. Now,
credit to.
The way you speak of taste now, when you have whiskey for the first time and you recall it later, you're recalling this experience that's been processed by your brain. Something you do in the book a lot is you talk about evolutionary biology. You talk about how tastes may have a root in evolutionary bio. How is that? Why is that?
I mean, Paul Rozin, who's a food researcher, he's been called the father of disgust, which is kind of a funny title to have. But I mean, he says that disgust linked to food is sort of this primal dislike, and that it comes with its own set of facial reactions, the aversive gape, where if you drink sour milk or something that you're not expecting, your body is preparing to vomit. You sort of shrivel up your nose, your mouth has a gape. They've seen it in rats. They've seen it in all sorts of things. So, it kind of speaks to another aspect of liking, which it really is pre-verbal. Before we ever had ways to talk about why we liked what we like or rate things with stars, obviously, we had these nonverbal ways of communicating to our neighbor what might be a dangerous thing to consume. Consume in that regard being food, really, but I think some of the basic impulses almost carry over to other forms of art. So if you saw sort of a disgusting photograph that you thought was disgusting, you might have triggered some of that same aversive reaction.
I see, and you also say that we're predisposed to be more acutely aware of our dislikes versus our likes, which I found very curious. Is there a basis for that?
Yeah, again, I think that, and you can make an evolutionary biology argument. I mean, the food you dislike, what you like is what didn't kill you yesterday. I mean, the food that's familiar to me is the food you're still eating and you haven't suffered from. So, it sort of makes sense. You go with what's right in front of you, what's familiar. But dislike, sort of forming an instinctive early warning system. I mean, it's more important to be aware of your dislikes from that point of view than your likes, because that's the hazard. Sure. Obviously, a dislike for a song isn't going to kill you, and dislikes are. Likes and dislikes are funny in another way, in that likes are really a social thing. We bond over likes, and we advertise our likes. We tend to broadcast our likes. Unless you're Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols, scrawling "I hate Pink Floyd" on your T-shirt, people generally don't go around like saying, "I hate this, I hate that." I mean, we all know someone like that. But dislikes tend to be more private. Interesting, from a brain point of view, the evidence is a little weird about where liking sits in relation to disliking, and it might just be on the same spectrum and sometimes blurred and sometimes hard to figure out. And done interesting fMRI studies where, of course, fMRI studies are always incredibly blurry and you can't draw too much from them, but areas involved, you show people photographs of people they do not like, and some of the same brain activation happens as in expressions of romantic love. So the old cliche, there's a thin line between love and hate, may actually not be that far off. And as long as we're getting this powerful signal in the beginning, I think we may tilt either way. But what might be more important is that you had something moved you, and maybe you need to figure out how that was.
I see. So sort of related to this, you talk about assimilation and contrast. When we're told by a friend or by a Yelp review that we're going to like something, one of two things can happen, either assimilation or contrast. I guess assimilation means you might also adopt that like. Contrast is you kind of push back against that like. And you say with food, it's more common to have this assimilation. Somebody likes it, you kind of will like it as well. But with media, such as films, it's more that you might push back against somebody else's like. Why is that?
Yeah, although I think on Yelp you could see a lot of contrast, as they call it. Also, I mean, I think it has to be one of the most. If you did a word cloud of Yelp, I mean, expectation must loom pretty large. This place did not live up to my expectation. This place exceeded my expectations. I've come to just from a personal point of navigating the world, I've come to the point of view that it's better to suffer from permanent low expectations. And this might be just speaking as a New Yorker, but if you, and this is the way an interesting way we categorize the world. And you can it's been, I think the phrase was protection for the good, but categorizing the world is incredibly useful in this regard. I mean, and we all do this. If you go to an airport, don't think you're going to have like the meal of your life, but if you categorize it as if you lower your expectation set to airport food, you suddenly can have a much more positive experience. With film, film just gets so much more into kind of personal taste, which is a much harder thing to nail down. And we've all had the experience of recommending something to someone, like this movie is going to change your life. It turns out not to change your life. What went wrong there? It's just a far messier process, I think.
Okay, so you think it has roots in expectation?
I mean, expectation is huge. I mean, I can't put a percentage on it, but a huge amount of we go into something either with being framed and conditioned on how we think we're going to like it. There's a lot of great experiments about, Heston Blumenthal and some psychologists did a study about give people frozen savory mousse. They find it disgusting. They can't stand it. Give them salmon flavored ice cream. They find this disgusting. Literal disgust was evoked during this experiment. Give them frozen savory mousse. Kind of don't know what to expect, but it sounds like a better proposition. It doesn't violate some notion of what's good ice cream. People love the frozen savory mousse.
Wow.
So same exact dish, and we've seen this kind of blind taste test with the same exact product done in all kinds of different ways, and it's just all about how you're framing it, what you're expecting out of that.
Got it. Can you talk a little bit about variety amnesia? What is it and how it affects us?
One of these kind of phenomena studied by psychologists. I mean, there's another thing called diversification bias, which I mentioned in the book that I suffered from and still suffer from. Does anyone remember like the Kellogg's Variety Pack cereal, like in the grocery store? Okay, so they come in these 24 packs of all this, Frosted Flakes, Sugar Pops. So I would beg my parents to get these things, and a week would go by. I'd blitz through the Frosted Flakes, and you get down to the bottom. It's like your Totals and your All Brands, and so the question was, why didn't I just buy a big box of Frosted Flakes? Because I was people often think they want more variety in the moment than they actually want in some consumption interval down the road. And the variety amnesia is when it's kind of almost the reverse of that, where you forget how much variety you've had in your diet, for example. Oh, we just ate there last week, or something like that. But the point is that we're often unaware of how much our tastes are changing, either retrospectively or prospectively, where they've been, where they're going.
Sure.
We're sort of not as I don't know how to describe it. Not as aware of that status as we think we are, I think.
I see. Let's dive in a little deeper with diversification bias. Two examples in the book. One, you spoke with the folks who make MREs. These are meals ready to eat, which soldiers are given. And something that I found really surprising is, you might expect that these soldiers will tire less quickly of the flavorful food. They'll enjoy variety. They'll enjoy flavors, but they actually tire far less quickly of the bland food. It makes more sense for them to have blander food, I guess. Why is that?
I mean, the argument I was given was that flavorful food sticks out in your imagination, and the more you can remember it, the more you can remember actually having it, and it just, it's sort of availability bias. It looms larger. Bland food, you sort of immediately forget the experience, so then the next time the consumption experience rolls around, you're ready to roll again, and less fatigue. And this ties into something else, one of my favorite sort of phenomena we experience, which is called sensory-specific satiety. And this idea that, so much of our liking, I think, is based on anticipation or memory.
Okay.
And so you go into a meal, you're very excited to eat it, you start to eat, and the moment you start to eat a certain entree, your reported liking for that food begins to go down, and it kind of falls off the hedonic cliff. And the way you can boost your hedonic appetite back up is to switch foods. So the theory is that sort of the body has an internal thermostat, you're regulating and giving you signals of when it's time to switch something. But they've done great experiments with even Smarties candy, and if you eat only green Smarties, you begin to get tired of the green Smartie. Give people blue Smarties, suddenly their liking goes back up. So there's just this kind of it's a reset of your palate and almost your brain, I think, and you're primed to want more all of a sudden. So.
Interesting. So related to that, one way we marketed this talk internally is we posed questions that kind of come up in the book to Googlers and kind of whet their appetite to come here. And one of those questions was, why do we crave monotony at breakfast? Or maybe not crave it, but we sort of expect to eat similar things for breakfast, but at dinner we want variety. I can't have Chinese, I had Chinese last night. So why is that?
I'm actually not sure that's been answered, but okay. I mean, it's a question that was asked to me by E.P. Koster, a Dutch food researcher. I mean, I guess there's certain situational factors, right? You wake up, you need convenience. You're not going to go looking for adventurous foods, preparing adventurous foods. Maybe there's something about the body just not being primed for novelty upon waking up. There's a lot of things we don't do in the morning, I guess, that we do at night, but
sure.
So there's simple, just structural factors. Whether there are other things beyond that, I'm not sure that we know.
Okay, fair enough.
But I feel like it is a real phenomena that I've stayed at, probably all stayed at a hotel in a place like China, and they have like the 5 different breakfasts out of different foods from different countries. I always just go for like the pancakes. I mean, I'm never getting the congee or whatever. So.
Oh yeah, I need my cream of wheat here at the Google Cafe every morning, and that's just how I roll. But something you just mentioned, we begin to like some things less the more that we are exposed to them. Okay. But you have this, you quote, some things we like less the more we're having them. But there's an implication that sometimes we like things more the more we're exposed to them. And so you were talking about complexity, I think. Something like a Coca-Cola or a Dr. Pepper is complex. It keeps us coming back versus an orange soda, which might be pretty nice the first time you have it, but your brain sort of, gets tired of it quicker because it's not as complex.
Yeah, this was a theory that Howard Moskowitz, a food researcher, kind of gave to me. And Coca-Cola, you can't figure out what that flavor blend is. It's a more complex thing. Your memory tires of it less quickly. Orange soda is pleasurable, but right, it's orange. There's not much mystery upon the 4th drink. The first drink is about the same as the 4th. And I sort of, maybe taking liberties here, I've sort of stretched that metaphor in the book to talk about something like pop music. I mean, I think psychologists talk about this U-shape of liking between complexity and simplicity, and we all kind of have a slightly different point based on personality, but humans in general kind of want to be in the middle of that. And you can almost read pop music as sort of the simple, sugary orange soda rush that tastes great going down, but maybe hear it 10 times in a row. Something like jazz or more atonal or some sort of more complex music might be sort of a Coca-Cola, if you want to read it. A little harder to figure out what's going on, takes longer to appreciate it, perhaps.
Sure. If you don't mind me asking a question related to my own life, after reading this book, a friend recommended some music to me recently that I was listening to this past week, and really loved a couple of the songs and binged them, listened to them maybe 5 or 6 times on one car ride. What I've noticed the past week is whenever I'm walking out of a building, going to another building, I have these songs just going on in my head. I'm walking kind of to that pace. It's almost as my brain, I wake up in the morning and I have the song going in my head. My brain's almost figuring them out. And I notice the next time I play the song, it doesn't have that same, oh my God, this song is amazing feeling. Is that sort of what you were describing with pop songs getting older quicker to us?
Yeah, and I mean, it's an interesting thing about hearing music multiple times. Psychologists talk about processing fluency. And I think the easier something is to read, the more we enjoy it, the theory goes. And what we like is not so much the thing itself, is our ability to process and understand that thing right away. So I think this happens when you learn a language. Some languages sound a little bit dissonant to the ear when you first hear them. People say, "Oh, that's an ugly language," and I think it's not ugly. It's just that the people who speak it don't think it's ugly. It's just that you don't speak it. You don't know what to listen for. You're not fluent in that language. So as you begin to learn it, you begin to like it. And I think language works like music in this way. And Rick Rubin even used the word. I think he used the word fluency, talking about 9 Inch Nails. Like the first time he heard this 9 Inch Nails record, he didn't like it. He felt like he was hearing a new language. He didn't know what the reference points were. And I mean, this is just this is sort of appreciation 101, but I think it's often forgotten, some of these dynamics.
Okay, that's fascinating stuff. Can you talk briefly about taste as a tool for class mobility? This is something that I've been reading about lately. I think a lot of folks are covering this idea that taste implies not just who we are, but in terms of what we like, but where we stand in society.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the high era of that taste as social signal we've passed it. I think, I mean, it's sort of like 1950s, perhaps, in terms of culture, with all these sociologists with theories of highbrow, lowbrow, middlebrow. And what happened in the past few decades, people talk about is a cultural omnivorousness came out, in which it wasn't so much important as the thing you liked as, I mean, you couldn't discount entire genres all at once. Like, country music is not equivalent to opera. You had to sort of figure out within those genres what was happening. I mean, what's interesting to me, someone living in Brooklyn, New York, circa 2016, is that as incomes go up and among a certain class and people are more similar, you have to fight harder to achieve that distinction that was once possible when societies were more, let's say, going back to feudal aristocracy times. I mean, you knew what the elite taste was, you knew what the peasant taste was. But
sure,
everyone in Brooklyn is like within a certain bandwidth, let's say. So hence you see this kind of extreme signaling and distinction at places like coffee shops, where each week there seems to be some new form of coffee preparation being rolled out that I haven't yet learned about, so I feel slightly not up to snuff. So things that were once luxury goods have become democratized, and things that were once everyday goods have become increasingly subject to these almost connoisseurial sort of energy. So I spent time with a denim maker in South Carolina, and he talks about he paid $30,000 for a sewing machine that is obsolete. It was obsolete from the 1930s on. He tracked it down in Thailand on eBay. The reason he bought this is so he could make what's called a chain stitch. There's a little thing on the bottom. These pants actually don't have it, I think, but denim connoisseurs, of which they are now, I mean, we'll be able to spot this from across the room. So he paid all this money to create this little thing that only a few people will see, a huge social value for those people.
I see.
And and there was a very happy guy in Thailand who thought he was stuck with this kind of surplus that was able to resell it back to the United States at quite a profit.
Oh, that's great. Let's dive a little deeper. This actually it really fascinated me. So what I want to do is I want to reference an article published in New York Magazine, the Science of Us section, just this past week. The article is called "Why You Swipe Left When Someone Says They Love Nickelback," and it's by Carrie Rom. So she kind of parallels a lot of the stuff you just talked about, that late 1800s, we have people moving into more metropolis areas, into bigger cities. Whereas previously, courtship, was old-fashioned. A gentleman would go meet a woman's family, spend time, talk about shared values, etc. Now you have young people in these big cities, and the question is, how are you going to ever know who this person hitting on you at the bar, how do you know who they are? How do you know what they're about, what their values are, et cetera? And likes become this way of connecting with people. If you both like Nickelback, or if you both hate Nickelback, you might bond over these things. But you mentioned that you cite the low success rate of online dating, which is often based on just shared likes. Do you think that I don't know if you didn't research heavily into online dating, but do you think likes matter maybe as much as we put a lot of emphasis on likes these days?
Yeah, I was going to do some dating stuff, and then I had lunch with Christian Rudder, who's the OkCupid guy, and he was working on his own book, so I figured, well, I don't want to poach onto that. But there is very interesting data there.
Sure.
But yeah, I know there was a dating service started up that was specifically using musical taste as a way to kind of connect people. But how important this is a very certain musical taste matters more at a certain time of life, right? So I mean, it's a more affiliative, associative thing at a certain time. So I mean, when online dating, you're even using broader things than that, and that's still pretty poor predictively. So just something like music is, I mean, my wife actually wrote for Rolling Stone for many years, and we have pretty different musical tastes, and we've been married for 15 years. So I think it's kind of interesting and perhaps important in some initial, just conversational way. But as far as it's not one of these sort of underlying themes, I would think. I mean, it can be associated with other lifestyle factors. I mentioned the insane clown posse in the book. If there are two juggalos that meet and decide to get married, I mean, they may have a broader set of interests than just that music, or they may not.
Sure thing. So one thing I appreciate about your books is, a friend and I joked that the last half of the book is footnotes. I know that you like to have your points grounded in research, right? So I know that maybe you haven't researched online dating to the effect that you can be the expert on it. I guess I'm curious, you talk so much about how likes come from, we don't even analyze how we get our likes, why we like things we do. There's fluidity to our likes. One day we hate something, tomorrow it's our favorite thing. Does it make you skeptical of likes, or does it make you kind of encourage us to want to think more about our likes?
And it's a good question. I mean, what are likes?
Uh-huh.
And is an Instagram like the same as a YouTube thumbs up, the same as a 5-star? Yeah, I mean, these are very kind of inexact currency here. That so
you liked that YouTube video, so did I. We should hang out sometime, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much noise in all that stuff, right? I mean, if you thumb up the best kitten video I've ever seen, is that the same as you kind of mildly like something? There's only one signal. So, I mean, it reminds me of something, though, that there's a difficulty to trying to drill too far down into some of the stuff. I was talking to the people at Pandora, and for a while, we're going to do sort of a little A/B test for the feature where instead of just simply thumbing down, you could actually describe why you didn't like or why you liked the song. And the minute they started that up, it was just like, this was the favorite song at my daughter's wedding. This was this. This was this. I mean, they had no way to basically do anything with any of that information, so they got rid of it and went back to. So sometimes a thumb up or thumb down is really all you want.
I see. Speaking of which, one other question we threw out in the marketing was, YouTube used to have a 5-star rating system for videos, but why did they go away from that?
I think they felt that a lot of people were just using 5 stars as an implicit thumbs up, and there was just not enough. There was a heavy skew toward 5-star, and that's something you see, of course, in a lot of these data sets. And I've come to be very suspicious of almost discount entirely, except when it's my book on Amazon, 5-star reviews and 1-star reviews, because they each come with their own set of. And we all know this, but I mean, 1-star review is like someone's grinding a very heavy axe there about the bad night they had at a restaurant, and 5 stars is probably a friend or a plant, a fraud.
I see.
So 3.5 is sort of the happy, where you find the interesting stuff, I think.
That's good to know. I want to ask you one or two more before we go to the audience. One of these things is conformity versus distinction. And you cite conformity versus distinction as one of the tensions that goes a great way towards explaining our liking, towards accounting for our taste. The example I thought of right away, conformity and distinction, is men's ties. Neither of us is wearing a tie. I remember, I was in high school, and it was about the time when I said, hey, I should probably care about how I look. And at the time, these sort of thickish ties were in style, so I bought a bunch of thicker ties. And by the time I got to college, the skinny tie was back, thanks to Mad Men, and I was a schmuck all of a sudden. What about these trends you talk so much in the book about how likes just change with trends. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think, for that part I talked a lot to anthropologists, because I think there's a huge social learning component here that probably has an evolutionary story if you want to go there. But just,
sure.
I always thought the word ape was sort of ill chosen because humans mimic much more strongly than apes. I mean, there's some great research by Michael Tomasello that take like a glass box and there's something trapped inside, and if you show a chimp will have the human do it, the chimp follows it. The chimp will sort of figure out what the best way to do it is pretty quickly, regardless of what the human is doing. The human will continue to follow the human watching the box will continue to follow the demonstrator, even when they're doing it in an inefficient way, because they're not sure that there's some sort of social norm that they should be following. We just implicitly trust what other people are doing as a signal, perhaps going back to this time when we lived in small bands.
Sure.
And conformity was kind of survival in a way, and that it raises the question of why anyone does anything different, and that perhaps has a larger basis in just contemporary society of trying to achieve distinction through. So it's a very complicated thing, but I think a lot of these processes are just literally. There's a great story in the New York Times about you may have seen with the Sprouts trend that took off in China in the last few years, where people were putting these sort of plastic sprouts of vegetables or fruit replicas in their hair. And this article was spending a lot of time trying to explain why And the only reason they could really come up with is that people had seen other people doing it specifically on social media, and people on Instagram with selfie sticks, photographing them. So someone saw it and they decided to mimic it. They thought, that's sort of cool. I don't see a function for it, but I'll try it out.
I see. You mentioned the hipster effect as well, and I was very glad to hear there's an effect that's called that. And I could be butchering it here, but the obvious question when enough people are putting sprouts in their hair, because it's cool, you're part of this cool club, what happens when everybody's now got sprouts in their hair? Does it change?
Yeah, it almost reminds me of sensory-specific satiety, where there's no reason we should fatigue of seeing or even hearing the same song. There's not quite the same thing as nutrition, but if suddenly everyone's wearing the same shirt in this room, biologically it doesn't fatigue our eyes. So there's some other social thing where some people need a certain amount of distinction. It's kind of, survival of the fittest is the one argument, but that doesn't necessarily explain why new things arise. And so this is kind of an open question: where do innovators come from? Where do artistic innovators come from? They should really be doing, for greater social success, you should conform to the existing group, and that's a much harder thing to explain, the disconformity than conformity.
I see.
But but Jonathan Tubal, this mathematician, did a great analysis where he sort of said there's once in a while a statistical oscillation where, because the conformists and the nonconformists aren't necessarily planning ahead of time what they're going to do, they can be sort of discoordinated, and the squares might start doing what the hipsters are doing almost by accident, or because, and so the hipsters get annoyed, they feel like their thing has been co-opted, they move on.
Sure.
I use the example of shell art from the show Portlandia, where Spike, the hipster, he sees this guy doing all the things he does, shell art, fixed gear bikes.
Right.
And then he declares those things to be over. Like, why are they over? So he can eke out another form of distinction.
I see. So it might be a similarly U-shaped curve. Then you mentioned that some people have a need to kind of be a little removed from the norm, and so everybody has a particular taste for being away from the norm.
Yeah, and again, the anthropologists will say this is what they call a weird thing. Western, educated, industrialized, rich democracies. There are other societies that the conformist norms are stronger, and but I think living in a consumer society with endless choice, we have a lot more options to pick from and different ways to distinguish ourselves. So
sure thing. One more question from me. You can tell that I'm into the social psych part of this. You mentioned Freud's famous narcissism of small differences, the minor variances in people who are otherwise alike that form the basis of feelings of hostility between people. And it got me thinking, you might have a family member or a friend or a partner who you think about, all the major values are in line, background is in line, future goals in line, but they like some band that you just can't stand. And if it was a stranger who liked that band, you wouldn't think twice. That difference in like doesn't matter. But when it's somebody that you care for, that you feel very akin to, how can you like that? That question just kind of is a dagger at times. Did anything in your research, anybody you speak to, have any suggestion as to why those things kind of stick out? Or is that just...
Not in kind of that social way. I definitely remember, making mixtapes for people and then feeling a bit betrayed when they reported that not 100% of the songs were a success. It's like, how did you misread me? But I do think that one thing I thought more about was just, these kind of, when you do have a strong subculture, or really any culture. The thing that's fascinating to me is there's a whole psychology of categorization, and the more we like something, the more we want to categorize, and then the more we categorize, the more we like the things we put into those categories. So if you pick any kind of, I'm a avid cyclist, so we talk about narcissism and small differences. We have debates about things that in the outside world would seem ridiculous, but you go into the cycling world, there's sock height, what kind of handlebar tape, carbon or steel, or any number of these distinctions that you could argue about, and so you could probably take any punk rock, or people will be having stronger arguments within those fields than intra fields. It's just no one else cares. Those are the only people that actually care.
I see. Very good.
So.
I was curious how the internet has played a role in our likings and dislikings. Has it become more of a normalizer where we tend to like the same things as everybody does, or has it pushed in our extremes like we see in the political systems and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think back to when I was younger and I kind of discovered this this punk rock music, let's say in the 1980s, and I thought like I had to track this down on a small station. No one knew about it. I didn't really know how many people in the world were actually fans of this. So come now with Spotify and everything, I thought, well, if everyone had access to everything, then surely these kind of hierarchical forms of popularity would wither away. I mean, why would we have the pop charts if you can get anything? You don't only have to listen to what the top 40 station is playing you. But some research that I was given by someone who analyzes this, shows in fact the opposite has happened, where hits now sort of persevere longer than they did before. Radio songs are played on radio longer. I mean, 2013, Robin Thicke's "Blurred Lines" was played twice as much as the most popular song from 2003. So I think the tail has gotten longer, but I wouldn't say it's gotten fatter, and then the spikes have gotten higher. So I think otherwise, I think the internet, really amplifies existing dynamics rather than creating entirely new dynamics unto itself. Yeah, I'll stop there. But
hi, so I work on YouTube recommendations. So I would love to hear your opinion on what's a good set of recommendations. Like if you got to show somebody 12 videos, should you show them if you think they like cat videos, should you show them a whole bunch of cat videos, or should you try to diversify them somehow, or maybe you should show them some total serial every now and then, something that they really don't like, just so they can not watch it and feel good about themselves. So what is the optimal video recommendation, if you have an opinion?
I mean, it's so hard. Talking to people here at Google, like Amit Singhal, about knowledge graph, and just how hard search is as a problem, trying to figure out people's intention with their search. I mean, taste is just blows that out of the water. Complexity. I mean, I'm talking to people at Pandora. If you like the band Fun, We Are Young, are you coming to that because you were a fan of them before? Are you coming to that because you're a Glee fan? So the thing about recommendation, I always wish there was a little bit more, and maybe some services even have this, I'm not aware of this, but some dials or sliders where you can sort of tweak your own appetite for discovery or adventure. Hey, I'm feeling more adventurous today. Is there anything like that currently on YouTube? Or
no, currently it's it's completely passive. It just says here's a bunch. If you go to YouTube homepage, you just get a bunch of videos. There's no way that you can interact with that process, except for if you really care about something, you can click on a video and say I don't like this recommendation. But very few people do that. So.
And a cat video is a much slippier format than music. I mean, cat. I guess it is a genre, cat videos, but you don't have genres. I might be speaking out of turn here. I don't know if there might be genres within cat videos. The cat and the scared by the cucumber or something. So hey, I want more. Yeah. So I mean, it's just stuff like that seems so slippery to me. I don't really know, except maybe some of these personalization. I'm feeling more adventurous, but.
So I feel like in the last few decades, with massive industrial production of things, I've heard this term come up, institutionalized good taste, where you get things like you buy clothes at Gap, you're not going to look too weird. You drive a Volkswagen, you're not going to look too weird. Everybody has a Apple computer, and they all look really good. What sort of effect has that had, you think, on taste in general?
It's a great question. I've often remember the Christmas time going to Pottery Barn or some of these stores at the mall, and they all seem to be playing the same kind of tasteful, retro Christmas music. And at some point, what would have been rare a while ago suddenly just became this almost inescapable norm. And I feel like the internet, with Instagram in particular, has radiated fashion trends much more quickly. I mean, you now have. There used to be this process of the Parisian shows, the stuff trickling over here, the stuff trickling from New York to the hinterlands. I mean, now Burberry is now selling some of the stuff directly from their runway show because, there's no lag anymore. People can take an Instagram of the runway show, and that trend is immediately blasted out. So in some ways, whatever the distinction or the rarity of that fashion trend has now been lost. So I don't know. It's a slippery thing. There's always a reaction when there's too much of one thing, and I've seen some arguments in favor of ugly fonts, or because there is something where there's some research with font fluency that the more fluent the font is, the less likely you are to remember what you're reading because it just goes down so easily. So to really stand out in a world of uniform good taste, you just have to take a left and trying to think of, something like brutalism in architecture has ridden various waves of liking and disliking, reappreciation. A building like the Sydney Opera House in Australia, what is the most loved building in Australia today? The Sydney Opera House. What was the most hated building in Australia in 1973? The Sydney Opera House. And everything changed around the Sydney Opera House. Sydney Opera House changed things itself, and so yeah, that's where it's just this fascinating, very fluid dynamic. I think if that answers your question, which I don't think it does, but.
Movie critic A.O. Scott was here about a month ago, and he talked about the role of the critic in now that everybody can essentially voice their opinion on media. So I was curious where you think what the role of other people's opinions are, and where can authority come from, and what's the role of a sort of authoritative voice on a particular piece of media.
Yes, but I myself don't necessarily subscribe to the kind of full democratization of everything that we can do away with. Because if you look at all these services, they've all tried to reinstill authority under some other guise. I mean, so we say the restaurant critic is dead, but then on Yelp you have the expert reviewer. I mean, all of these services now have some delineation between the average schmuck and an Amazon top 500 reviewer, who may be reviewing everything from hammers to Hegel. I mean, it's a very slippery thing. They're not necessarily a critic in one thing. So I feel like we may have had this initial reaction of sort of tearing things down and being just opening ourselves to all the information in the world, but there now may be a secondary thing happening where it's just too much. We need some kind of authority just to wade through the morass, and you've seen some kind of flip-flopping between pure algorithmic recommendation and human curation in this regard. I mean, it's funny though. I mean, taste is a very controversial thing, really. I mean, just the notion of it. And when I was talking to Pandora about visiting Pandora, they said, "I'm working on a book about taste." They said, "Well, we don't really like to use that word. We're not trying to prescribe anyone's taste here. We're about discovery, and you can like what you like. We'll point you to that." And I mean, there is still the uncomfortable truth that they don't have every song in the world. They've made a decision about what they're going to play for you within this. They'll give you like a sandbox, but they've outlined the edges of that sandbox. So I think the authority thing is still there. But whether it's individual critics at newspapers, I'm not sure. I'm less optimistic about that, perhaps.
So Veblen wrote The Theory of the Leisure Class, which is a 19th century book where he does discuss taste as well, being a product of like social stratification. Is there anything left over from that theories today, or is it like all consumerism and pure consumerism?
I mean, I think there is. I just think the stratification is a bit less purely hierarchical the way it might have been before. I mean, the 1% out there probably has a taste. I don't know that it really becomes that we aspire to it anymore. And I think there's been a lot of research into. I use the example of the quotative like. This is the thing where we say like a lot. That didn't come from wealthy people. It came from high schoolers in San Fernando Valley, as research has shown. I mean, that's not necessarily a status group for society as a whole, yet that has filtered throughout society. So just the transmission of those things, I think, is not quite as top down as it used to be. I'm sure it's still there, just in many different ways. But I mean, just looking at this room, you'd be hard pressed to kind of analyze who made more money than other people. I mean, I may have the most expensive jacket on in the room. I may make the less money. It's a very.
I guess this room is. I guess this room is the 1% room. So.
Thank you. One final question, Tom. It's a classic end of interview question. Okay.
Okay.
What surprised you the most in preparing this book and researching it, writing it, talking about it?
Oh God, and I still haven't gotten good at answering that. But
sure.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think just the fluidity of a lot of the things, and the extent to which subconscious influences might be acting on what we thought were long held or sort of internal likes, and just how flexible my own likes were when I really sort of examined them and put them under the microscope and started to think about, who I was 10 years ago, who I'll be 10 years from now. But yet how strongly we cling to those things. I mean, they really seem like a pole star to us. I don't know if that's really surprising. I think I'll need to work on that one some more. I'm sorry.
Tom Vanderbilt, You May Also Like, Taste in an Age of Endless Choice is now available. Thank you, Tom, for being here.
Thank you.